Hey, thank you so much for coming in to have this chat. I do have a few questions for you, and it's really a theme. Honestly, I hear these questions quite often, and I thought we trust your opinion, your advice, and our clients love the mess out of your team. So I figured we would just talk this out with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm open book. So what questions you got for me?
Okay, so let's talk about buy down and whatever that means to buyers and why they should care.
So when you're asked a question about buy down or you see it mentioned online, etc., there's basically two types.
Okay.
There's a permanent buy down and a temporary buy down.
Okay.
And what we're talking about buying down is the actual interest rate for the borrower. Okay. So as the name implies, a permanent buy down is where the interest rate is permanently bought down. It'll never be different from when you close, as long as you've got that exact same mortgage. So of course, that doesn't prevent you from refinancing in the future. It just means that for the life of that loan, however long that loan term is, that's going to be your mortgage until you either sell or retire or refinance.
Isn't that what all mortgages are? I mean, the fixed rate is okay.
Yep.
Okay.
But points are how you control that. So 1 point equals 1% of the loan amount. So if the buyer is paying 1 point to buy their interest rate lower, it's going to add 1% toward the cost. So if they're borrowing $100,000, paying 1 point increases the closing cost by about $1,000. All right. And now for every 1 point that gets paid, it roughly translates to about 0.25% in interest rate. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but that's just kind of a decent back of the napkin calculation. Okay. So if you're paying 2 points, which is super common for some of these, I'm not going to mention names, big branded lenders out there, they just automatically show rates out in the universe, but in the fine print, there's 2 points to get them. So just know 2 points is 2% of the loan amount. So if you're borrowing, again, $100,000 for simple math's sake, that's increasing the client's closing cost by $2,000. If they're borrowing $400,000, well, that's $8,000. So that's a big difference, and it's increasing or decreasing the interest rate by about 0.5% in that example.
That's what I was getting ready to ask, what it does to the interest rate. So we take an interest rate from, let's say, market rate right now, what, 6.25, 6.5? I don't know what it is.
Yeah, mid sixes. It just kind of depends.
So
but maybe from mid sixes to 6 or upper 5s, something like that.
A 2 point buy down would do that? Really?
Right. Now, here's the thing, though. Whether or not it makes sense to do that is a different conversation, because what's it costing you from a dollar perspective, and what's it reducing the monthly payment by?
Because that's what the rate is all about. When people are saying, I want a lower rate, I want a lower rate. Well, why? Why does it matter? So that my monthly payment can be lower. What does that do to their monthly payment, that half? I mean, $8,000 is a lot of money.
It is. I mean, I would have to run a specific scenario for them, but generally speaking, if you can have a break-even period, less than 3 years, you should consider doing it. But Bobbie, right now, with what the economists that I follow seem to think is going to happen to mortgage rates over just the next 18 to 24 months, they're likely going to be lower, like possibly substantially lower. So for me, I'm having a hard time recommending to clients to pay all of these points to buy down your rate if you're going to be out of the mortgage, let's say in 8 months, 9 months, 12 months, 16 months, whatever it is. If it's less than the break-even period, then should you be doing it? So like I had like an actual example this morning from a client. He wanted as high of a rate as possible because he is not going to be in that mortgage for very long, and he didn't want to pay 2 points to get his rate under 6%. He actually wanted as high of a rate as I could show him. Like literally, my rate sheet doesn't go any higher, because he wants as little cost as possible, because he knows he's not going to be in that mortgage. So that's an anomaly, because most consumers, there's a happy medium of you get a lot of bang for your buck. So like if the break-even period was 18 months to buy it down, yeah, sure. Let's have that conversation. But
So
if it's not,
for him, it's little money out of pocket, and that was the motivating factor for him.
yes. So the people that choose to buy their rates down, sometimes they mentally need to have the payment where it's at,
Okay.
like a specific payment. Maybe they're getting large seller closing cost contributions, so they want to have put those to their fullest use.
Allocate those funds somewhere, because there's only so much that you can do with those, right?
Exactly. But if the client, the buyer, is choosing to pay points and they're paying for it, we have to be a little bit more careful with how we're using the buyer's funds. If we're using the seller's funds, you can be a little bit more loosey-goosey with it. Now, permanent buy downs are available on every loan type except for down payment assistance programs.
Really?
Yeah, because down payment assistance programs, the interest rates are dictated to us, the lending community, and the borrower themselves. And T-Shack is the biggest one in Texas. They've literally got their rates published directly on their websites, and there is no buying them down. So if it's a down payment assistance program, there is no buy down capability, permanent buy down capability.
Got it.
But for every other loan program out there, it's a thing and has always been a thing. Now, what's a little bit different is that once interest rates got really crazy back in October of 2022, the temporary buy down has kind of come back into focus. So temporary buy downs are, as the name implied, temporary. And they're either bought down temporarily for 1, 2, or 3 years. Okay. So let's just do a 2-1 example, because that's the most common. So in a 2-1 temporary buy down, the interest rate is 2% lower the first year.
Okay.
1% lower the second year, and then year 3 through 30, it's the normal rate.
Is it market rate? Does it just okay? It reverts to
rate.
what?
So a completely made up example here. Let's say that the real rate should be 6.5%. On a 2-1 buy down, that means in the first year it'll be 4.5%. The second year, 5.5%. In years 3 through 30, it's the 6.5%. Now, the way this works, unlike the permanent buy down where the buyer themselves can contribute to paying points, with a temporary buy down, it has to come from the seller. Okay, so
Or
it has to come from the seller.
Right? Can it come from any other place? No.
It yes, but it can't come from the buyer. That's the key. Okay? So it can't come from the buyer. And honestly, because it doesn't make any financial sense for the buyer to prepay their own interest.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got to come from the seller as the form of seller closing cost contributions, because what happens is the servicer that the client's actually making their mortgage payment to after closing, they're going to hold in escrow the necessary funds to supplement the payment for the buyer. Okay, so again, just made up example. Let's say that the mortgage payment should be $3,000 a month, but because of the buy down, it's going to be $2,600 instead. So the payment's $400 lower per month for that first year. So $400 a month times 12 months, that first year, they have to have $4,800 set aside in an escrow account so that the servicer can supplement the monthly payment. And so the second year, let's say, because the rate increases now, let's say it's only $200 a month less now. So $200 a month times 12 months is $2,400. So they got to put that in the escrow account as well. So from day one, the seller is setting aside the exact dollar amount that the payment is going to be supplemented by into an escrow account separately, and the servicer is using those funds to hold the payment down. So at closing, the documents that the buyer is signing, it has the real mortgage payment.
Yeah.
Because that's what the bond investor in the secondary market's receiving.
I love it. I love it. Now, what are the chances that the rate has gone down by year 3 and you've done this 2-1?
Nice. So that's why a lot of people are choosing the temporary buy down over the permanent buy down, because on a temporary buy down, what you're hoping for, what you're doing is keeping the payment as low as possible during that 2-year time period in this example, because you're hoping rates come down during that time frame so that
Using
you can
someone else's money, but might I add?
yeah, you're holding the payment down so that in the hopes that you'll be able to refinance during that time period. And really that's very likely. So nothing's guaranteed, but I feel very confident that the majority of people buying homes right now are going to be having a refinance conversation before the end of 2024.
Well, I mean, I'm seeing our more savvy buyers utilize this option versus think of it. And I see a lot of people, they're like literally looking at this and they're looking at it in fear because they're seeing it as a balloon note and they're saying, oh no, I've been trained and conditioned and told not to ever sign up for a flex rate. And that's what ends of the spectrum. And I'm hearing our other buyers say, no, actually that makes sense. And I'll revisit this later. I guess my follow-up question would be the rate at the time they sign up, is that the rate that carries over into year 3? Am I understanding that? Or is it contingent on where the market is in year 3? I want to make sure I'm clear.
Where rates are in year 3 has nothing to do with how this is set up. Okay, so whatever the current rate is, when they go to lock in,
executing the loan. Okay.
Right. When you go to lock in, so that's the rate. And then it just so happens if it's a 2-1 buy down, year 1, it's going to be 2% less, year 2, 1% less, so on and so forth. So the key here though, is that you have to communicate with the lending partner to get an exact dollar amount of what the buy down cost, because let's just say hypothetically, I tell you, hey, the buy down is going to cost $10,000. And through negotiations, the buy down, the seller credit ends up getting negotiated at $9,000.
Oh,
well, guess what? Now we can't do a temporary buy down
when we
can only do a permanent. So my opinion, and you're the negotiating expert here, always ask for more than you need, because it'll inevitably get chopped down. You just have to make sure that you hold firm above the minimum required that's necessary.
And that number can change at any point based on market, or is that pretty consistent? If you've given a number today and 2 weeks later, buyer finds said house, is that pretty consistent? Will it stand?
It depends, because it's based off of the real interest rate and the loan amount. So if the loan amount is higher, for example, well, then the cost of it, even if the interest rate's the same, would be more, because now it's a higher loan amount.
Got it.
So I would err on the side of caution. I have a buy down calculator, by the way. I'll email it to you, frankly, if I haven't already. But it'll give you a good guide for what that looks like. You won't have the exact interest rate, but you'll get close, and then always just round up. Okay, so round up. And the temporary buy down, one of the key things is that money gets set aside at the servicer. So the question I get asked a lot is, well, what happens if I refinance 1 year in? What happens to all that extra money that didn't get
exactly right?
used?
Great segue.
It gets applied as a principal reduction to the client's loan. So they don't lose it because they didn't use it. They literally get their payoff dropped by whatever the dollar amount is. So the only downside to a temporary buy down is if, one, you're not able to refinance during that time frame, because that could happen. Heaven forbid it's because property values drop. That's not likely. Home values nationwide are expected to appreciate 3% this year and 5% next year, and our local market is likely going to do even better. or job loss. They don't qualify because, we're in a recession now and there's a job loss. So that's the risk of temporary versus permanent. Permanent, you put all your chips off the table in the very beginning and you've got the lowest rate that you can have for the life of that mortgage. And yes, if interest rates cooperate and you can refinance again, great. Temporary, you get a much lower payment in year 1 and year 2. But if something happens in the future, unknown, and you can't refinance, well, then you're year 3 and beyond, you're stuck at the forever rate.
Wait, we've been fortunate enough to do this together, and I'm so blessed to have you share this with our families and buyers. And man, I tell you, they come to us and they say, I want to buy in this market. It's perfect timing. I need to get closer to work, whatever the reason might be. But the rates are too high and I can't afford the payment. And here you show up with this amazing solution. I guess I want to ask, why are others not telling people about this? It was not until you and I had the conversation that I learned about it some time ago, of course, but why?
Yeah. Honestly, I would hate to speculate on other people's business practices. This tool is relevant right now.
Okay.
It wasn't relevant a year ago.
Okay.
And it might not be relevant a year from now, but
Okay.
but right now is the sweet spot. And there's just not as many lenders in the market that have 17 plus years of experience that have kind of gone through several cycles of this. So what's old is new, sometimes with strategies. And this is a good one to help create win-win scenarios. So buyers can use your negotiating skills to their advantage to help position themselves for long-term success, because after closing, that's where the real magic happens, because you and I, have to make sure that they're a successful homeowner. It's not enough to just get these people into homes. We have to make sure that they're successful. And part of that is making sure that they're always in the best financing possible. So you better believe that when rates cooperate, I will be more than happy to help all of these families improve their financial situation. But the mortgage they're getting up front is likely not the mortgage they will have by the end of 2024. Now, before I forget, with the temporary buy down, again, the loan programs that are used for it are mainly the vanilla ones, conventional and Govy, but down payment assistance programs, you can't do temporary.
Right.
I'm not aware of any jumbo lenders that do it.
Okay.
And non-QM loans really aren't a thing either for it. So it's just for the vanilla Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, VA, FHA, USDA.
Oh,
so that's the difference.
Okay.
So like I talked to some jumbo borrowers, and they're interested in that, but it's just not available. So we have to talk about permanent buy downs.
What's the limit on jumbo right now? I guess is it over
726,200.
Okay.
So a very, very large number. But that's when we pivot to the permanent buy down strategy. And then depending on how much seller contributions can be negotiated for, we can either look at a 3-1 buy down or combining a small permanent buy down with a temporary 2-1 buy down. It's all about how much concessions can be negotiated for and how best to use them to the buyer's advantage.
Can you marry concessions from different sources? So seller, I don't know what the other eligible sources would be, but can you bring them in from different avenues and kind of pull them together, or do they have to come from one avenue?
I've only ever really seen them come from the actual seller. For temporary, that's kind of the dominating piece. But for permanent, the buyer can contribute. There's things on the lending side called premium pricing. So if the client's credit profile will allow for it, we can charge a higher rate to provide a lender credit. That's exactly what that client this morning that I told you, a real life example, he literally asked for the highest rate sheet because he wanted as low of closing costs as possible, because that specific individual is going to renovate the property. He's going to have significant equity built in, and he wants to refinance into his forever mortgage when the home is done being renovated. And he's going to walk into hundreds of thousands of equity that he wouldn't have had otherwise. And so he doesn't see the need to pay 2 and almost 3 points to get the lowest rate on the rate sheet, because he's just not going to be into the mortgage that long.
Wait, is it possible that people are paying points and don't know it?
Oh my God, yes. So here's the thing, and you can soundbite this because it's very important. The lowest rate on the wrong strategy could be disastrous for a buyer. So they're always fixated on rate, and yes, it's important, but there are a lot of other considerations. So you just have to keep in mind, if you're just searching for the lowest rate, go to baitandSwitchMortgage.com. I'm sure they'll take great care of you. Okay. But if you want actual advice on something that'll actually close, work with the partner that you recommend, Bobbie, because that'll ensure your clients get the best service possible, is the reality of it.
And that coupled with the right negotiations too, because what I'm finding is you're going in to negotiate said concessions, and many times it's unsuccessful. And in our case, multiple times I'm seeing this come through for our buyers. I think our last one last week got money back at closing. She got a check back at closing. I don't even know if I told you that. They handed her a check back because they were able to save her money, even on the taxes or something else that happened. So it's just such a great thing to have the right partners at play.
Who you work with matters. And so again, the lowest rate on the wrong strategy, it could be disastrous. And it's all about the teamwork, because you need me to help advise on how the offer needs to be structured from the financing side of things. Absolutely. And then you use your amazing negotiating skills to go make it happen.
Great partnership. Wade, thank you for your time. Anything else we need to know about the buy down? I guess I do want to know this. How far out can we go? 2, 3? Is there a 5? Is there a 10? Does it make sense?
3 is the longest. And that answer is going to depend on which lender I'm taking the loan to. So again, as a broker who's got access to 80 different lenders, you know, not all of them even offer a buy down. Some of them only offer a 1 or 2 year, and there's a handful that offer 3. The problem is it costs quite a bit to get to that 3-year buy down, and you're not always able to negotiate as many concessions that are needed to get the 3-1. So if that ever were to happen, I get an executed contract with like really, really large seller concessions. I'm looking to see which box does it fit in, and then structuring it accordingly from there.
Does it ever exceed 6%? You know how there's caps on certain loan types and vehicles that we're in? Would you say that it ever?
That's a fantastic question. So the thing is, seller concessions, even if you're using these buy downs, do have to fall within the allowable interested party contribution limits. So on FHA, it's 6%. On conventional, with less than 10% down, it's only 3%.
Yep. From
10 to 25% down, it's 6%, and over 25% down, it's 9%. So just a back of the napkin calculation, like on just a normal loan, so not a buy down or anything, closing costs are going to be 3 to 4% of the sales price. So if you've got a conventional loan putting 5% down and you get 3% seller concessions, that's going to cover virtually everything. Virtually everything. But if you start trying to permanently buy down the rate or add in, the temporary buy down or something like that, then it might not.
Yeah.
So it just kind of depends.
And the buyer is still responsible for their own closing costs if we don't get enough money to do that. And it's ultimately up to the buyer to decide, where do I want the concessions at this point to go? Toward a buy down? Does it make sense for me? And that's where you're able to coach them through that, or toward my closing costs and keep that mortgage payment. I love that you guys do that with our clients.
Yeah. What does it look like side by side? And then let the client make the decision, and then we'll off to the races.
I love that. All right, Wade. Well, thanks for your time today. I appreciate this so much.
You're so welcome. Yep. Appreciate your partnership, and have a good rest of your day.
Do the same.